jumped because everyone had an invested interest in the maintaining of slavery. Now that war was a cover for the U.S. government to come down on a slave raid. Now coming down on the slave raid, they were not so scrupulous, because anybody who's low enough and dirty enough to take one human being and put someone in chains is not a real distinguisher of persons. American slavery was an equal opportunistic operation. Because when I give my lecture on Indian slavery, I start with a young girl by the name of Susan Mueller, German girl, who was enslaved and brainwashed on a plantation, believing that she was a Negro. German girl. Now people say, well, how is this possible? Because here's how propaganda clouds our vision. When we say German, we think blonde, blue-eyed, light-skinned. Okay? Not always so. Not always so. There were rather swarthy complected, dark-eyed and dark-haired Germans.
We visit them a little later on.
Okay, and see, when the summer of the year with no summer, these redemptioners or indentured servants would sell their services to a captain. He would take them to the New World, and then the captain would sell those contracts to plantation owners upriver and take these people off as indentured servants. Now, what happened in Susan's case, and it's well documented, was that both of her parents died en route. So she was taken to the Negro quarters and raised by Negro people, and so she was brought up to believe that she was black. And you say, well, how is that possible? Very simple, the one-drop rule. Okay, if you ever saw a showboat, you know exactly what I'm talking about. People who are white in appearance, if they have even a suspected drop, suspected, doesn't have to be true. If you read Walter Johnson's book on the Mississippi, you find that white people were terrified going on the riverboat that someone who wanted to get even with them, all they had to do was spread the rumor that they were really black. They would just spread the rumor that they were black. And then they would have to bear with the consequences. So whites were living in this great fear. And I thank Paul many times for this book, because it brought together, I knew the separate histories of Cuba, Haiti, Louisiana Purchase, but this one book pulled them all together. So when Jessup said this is a Negro war, the volunteers came from all of the South, but it still wasn't enough. Okay, here are the people who were fighting, but they knew the terrain. Okay? And the best that the Army had, not only was the Army, was the Marines, and finally the Navy fighting in the Indian War. And it never really ended. It never really ended. They shipped out a bunch to Indian Territory, which is another story about the blacks who went to Mexico, and I'm in touch with those people out in Texas. And some stayed and they fought, and the best story I like, the story that only recently, where the Seminoles incorporated, they even recognized the American government, and they have a tribe. The Miccosukes, who were not interested, and when they got interested in becoming federally recognized, the U.S. started playing games with them. Well, what did they do? They went to Cuba. Fidel says, I'll recognize you. So as soon as they get back to the U.S., the government says, please let us recognize you. And so finally, the group that I'm most interested in are the so-called independent Miccosukes who live in the Everglades. There are people there who do not even speak English, do not want to learn English, because they say, we are the unconquered. To go on a reservation, it means that we have been conquered. So I will leave it there, and hope we'll have some questions and we can get deeper into these issues. Thank you.
There's a lot of questions. People have been thrilled to listen to these stories I have. You see it on people's faces.
That's right.
So we're going to start questions. We have time. Every speaker came in well under the allotted limit. So this is a good piece of discipline. A lesson for all of us. Please.
Let me just say that in terms of 1803, the purchasing of the Louisiana Territory. What we lose sight of is that even though Jefferson was the president and sold to him by Napoleon, the key element there in terms of the selling of that extent of land was Toussaint Louverture.
Yeah, right.
They don't teach it that way, but that's how.
That's right.
And let me just add to it since you started that. Haiti was a jewel in France's colonial empire. And what the Mississippi Territory recognized was the food line, the supply line, as it bring food and all the other stuff, because Haiti was given over to plantation. And so when France lost Haiti, says, we don't need Louisiana. And so it was a bargain sale. They don't teach your history.
Let me last.
Not the next point.
You know, Napoleon met his George de Waterloo. And as he sat in the dungeon, he murmured to himself, if only I had listened to Toussaint. I probably would not be there.
When Jefferson, I'll add a little piece on that. When Jefferson realized after the Haitian Revolution that there might be a good real estate deal in the works, he sent a delegation to France, and the French delegation, I believe, included, what's his name, Benjamin Franklin.
Madison.
And they were, Madison too? Okay. And they were stunned because they went with the instructions to go slow and to negotiate carefully. But the French raised with them the question of selling them the Louisiana Territory because they had no more use for it. So really the United States doubled in size because of the Haitian Revolution. There's no question about that. So enough of these comments from here. We're going to get more comments, but they'll be more directed towards what people want to hear about. So please, raise your hand. Yes.
Yeah, I've heard that when they killed Nat Turner, they mutilated his body. You know, do you think about that?
I heard about that, but I couldn't really go into detail.
Another interesting point about Nat Turner, I mentioned Indian slavery during my remarks. Listen to the physical description of Nat Turner and tell me what you think. He was of bright complexion, but not a mulatto.
What was that?
He was a bright complexion, but not a mulatto. He had very thin hair around his face. Okay? Does anybody, now the depictions of him are just the opposite, that he was very dark, had a very thick beard. Not according to the description at the trial. Okay? Another coincidence is that he was near the Nottoway Indian Reservation. The last queen of the Nottoway Indian Reservation, her name was Edie Turner. Turner is an Indian name. As a footnote, that one of Nat Turner's great-great-granddaughters is now recognized in the state or in the Commonwealth of Virginia as a Nottoway Indian descendant. Twists and turns of history.
The plot keeps thickening. Please, more questions. There's another. Yes.
Hi. I'm interested in the current government in Haiti, which I understood was really the deal with France continued the Napoleonic kind of property, so that it's very difficult to now, after so many years, to clearly know who owns what. So when they try to do now roads and so forth after the terrible disasters in Haiti, it's very difficult. Do you know if things have changed.
Let me just repeat the question to Pierre. She wants to know, she said it seemed to be very difficult because of the old French laws and property laws to determine who owned roads and what. So what,
Who owns
especially after
land?
the earthquake, what's the situation with that? The ownership of roads and property and stuff like that? And the current Haitian government, what's that situation like?
Well, the current Haitian government was actually placed there by the Western powers, especially the United States and France, and with the Clintons, Hillary and what is his name?
That's Martin Lee, we now have a new government.
Well, that's a succession of Martin Lee.
Okay.
Yeah, they put Martin Lee in power so they could manipulate the millions, a billion that came to the coffers, the national coffers after the earthquake. Now Martin Lee stepped down after 5 years, and his successor is a guy who sympathized with all his plans, all the same schemes. So we don't consider that a real change, except a change of figures. But it's the same continuation of Martin Lee as a puppet of the Clintons.
And what about the roads? The infrastructure?
Actually, we remain to see what's going to happen with the roads. They were terrible. All contracts were made by President Préval before that regime, before the Martellis came in, and some of them were not who haven't been achieved. Some of them have been finished. So a lot of these contracts remain pending. We don't know. I don't know. I haven't been here with Haiti, but I heard that there's no new situation as far as the road situation is concerned.
And also, she was talking about, I think, ownership of the roads. and
Well, it's just the ownership of land,
Owner's
and
land.
that made it difficult to, clear things, to put a new road through, because of these old laws that France imposed ages ago. And I just wondered if the current government has been able to change the
I
law.
don't know. I doubt it. What I know is that the people who control Haitian economy, a small group of people, 15%, they're the one who decide investment, who get the contracts also to create the road. They have what do you call that? Special contract. Some of them they're very tight. They're very close to the government. So right now we know of a lot of contracts being given through the new government to create road and stuff like that. Well, I don't know. We have to see what happens, because it's only been a couple of years since the new government been in power. There's not much. He was already there. So we have to wait and see. Well, I haven't been to Haiti for past 3 years, so I don't know if there is any movement to change the road situation. I don't know.
More questions or comments, please?
I have two unrelated questions. One, how did word of the success of the Haitian Revolution make its way up to native and enslaved blacks?
Can you talk louder?
How did the word of the success of the Haitian Revolution reach the U.S.?
Because they had so many Negro seamen,
They carried the word to the enslaved people.
the sailors. And the sailors bring all kinds of things.
Do you use the mic?
And information, yeah. And I mentioned that the underrepresented part of history is the role that Negro seamen played in the vital trade of sailing. And if you've seen Moby Dick, you get a glimpse of it. But they were very important, and the word traveled like wildfire. You can imagine that they knew it in the slave quarters before the masters knew it in the house. And your second part.
I wanted to know, you said there were recent female scholars that you
Yes.
felt were getting it right. If you could give some examples.
Okay, one is Robbie Etheridge, and she publishes a journal called Native South, which I'm very much interested in, because Southern history does not begin with the antebellum Gone with the Wind. Okay, there are people here long before that, and Robbie Etheridge, she's doing a wonderful job. She opened the door for extensive studies on Indian slavery, which was big, and how they stepped over it was an act of propaganda, because they tried to make slavery sound as purely an African enterprise. Okay, there's a couple tribes, the Shishimasha in Louisiana and the Wakaman Siouan in North Carolina. They admit that their people have been enslaved, and they said at the time of the Emancipation Proclamations, Indians as well as Africans marched off those plantations. And so what they did was they brought Indian women and children to the plantation and African men, and so they mated them, okay? And so interesting sideline is a lot of the interpreters that went into Indian country were slaves. Now, where did they learn the language from? Okay, you couldn't learn that language in Africa. And Indian languages are not, contrary to the view that primitive languages are very simple. No, they're even more complex. If you ever saw the story of English, English grew out of a patois of a pidgin, where all these people basically of Teutonic background, the Danes, the Norwegians, and the Swedes, and all these other people, and they had to simplify it as a trade language, and the English that we know and use today is an outgrowth of a pidgin. So that these languages, these native languages, are far more complicated. And I'll give you an example. Among the Seneca, they say, well, it's time for us to eat. Well, who's in that we? Is it you and me? Or is it just us? Or is it you and so you, the person, you have to know whether you're included in that we. We only have one word to say we, but they have different words to denote differences. And that the European languages are based on nouns, things, commodities. Native languages are based on processes, verbs, and they see the world constantly growing. So in English you say the creation, you can't say that in an Indian language. You talk about the creating, and that's why we have to be in balance so that the creating can go on. Okay? Now, have I answered all your questions?
Well, you only gave one example
I only gave you one example of what?
of a woman scholar that.
Oh, I gave you two. I gave you Christina Snyder. Yeah, Christina Snyder. She has one of the best books about American captives, and she chronologizes the Indians had their own system of captives and what they did to captives, and they had two routes: either they would torture them or adopt them. Okay, and so when the Europeans came in, they said, "Wait a minute, we'll buy those people from you," and so they were converted into commodities, and they had the same system of coffles marching from the interior to Charleston. Charleston, South Carolina, was the major slave deportation point. And if you go to the slave market in Charleston, there's no mention of the Indians. But if you read the literature of the time, they call them Carolina Indians. They were sold in Boston, okay, New York, Bermuda, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Bahamas, and the West Indies. It got to such a point that Pennsylvania passed a law that says, no, we don't want any more Indian slaves because it's just becoming too much of a problem. Okay, so you got Robbie Etheridge and Christina Snyder are two. And then you got Sherry, I can't think of her whole name. She's done a great book on the Coushatta diaspora. And so they're just doing wonderful work, okay?
The what diaspora?
How's that?
Can you say that again? What diaspora?
It's called A Journey to the West. That's the title, A Journey to the West. The subtitle is about the Alabama and Coushatta. Alabama has bad connotation, but it's an Indian tribe. Tuskegee was a Creek Indian town. And when we talk about the native South, we look at where these names came from, what they originally were, and not so much what they have become in popular imagination. Paul?
Yes,
That's Lisa or the young man?
in the back.
Lance.
I just want to add a couple of comments.
Okay.
Please.
Since you talked about the African sailing,
Thank you very much for reminding me. Because, okay, you have Francisco de Miranda of Venezuela was housed in Haiti. Simon Bolivar was in Haiti. Jose Marti, Antonio Maceo of Cuba would receive support from Haiti. Haiti helped all of those countries in their independent struggles, and as soon as they got free and independent, they turned their backs on Haiti.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for reminding us of that.
Then McVeigh, American abolitionist, slave, who in South Carolina, and McVeigh, he says that he was in Haiti, as a matter of fact, in the time of the revolution. He escaped because he pretended he had epilepsy. So they put him on the boat, they sold him as a sick slave. He came to South Carolina, and that's how, after that, he started to make connection. Then McVeigh could speak French better than anybody else we know of who was born in slavery, who was born in a different country, not in Haiti. But then McVeigh was very smart, and he communicated very well with the Haitians, and he was, after he came to the United States, came back as a slave, okay, he established link with Boyer, at that time was the president of Haiti, and he was hoping to receive help from the Haitian government after his insurrection, but he didn't succeed. So a lot of these people were inspired by the Haitian Revolution, one way or the other, or directly connected. We also know about what the guy's name, Marcus Garvey. He wanted to organize go back to Africa movement, because he figured there are 400 million African descent people in the world, and he started a big movement here to bring these people back to Africa. Also, he didn't succeed, but he raised a lot of consciousness around African liberation. So these are the two examples of influence of another piece of history. I said these are the two examples, but there are more. Okay, John Brown, who was regarded as a bad guy here. Okay, he has a house. He has in Mount Elba in the Adirondacks. Okay, John Brown organized that Harper Ferry, yeah, revolt, and he was captured. He had succeeded, but he had a lot of followers. So there was one guy also.
A white guy.
He was a white guy. As a matter of fact, he was a bad guy here, but let me tell you something. The main artery in Port-au-Prince, Haiti is called Avenue John Brown. Yeah, to this day. Yeah. So it was probably the only place where John Brown is honored. beside Mount Elba. Everybody went to the Adirondacks. Make a stop at the Olympic place. You went there? Yeah, it's a great place. It's my sanctuary. I go there a lot and bring people. So John Brown, we owe a lot to John Brown, even if he didn't succeed. I mean, history talk about the victors, but we consider those who spread ideas of freedom as our heroes too. Okay? Merci beaucoup.
Also, John Brown was heavily influenced by Nat Turner. That's a given.
Yeah.
And subsequent to that, he went and, shall we say,
Say that again? Say that
People are
again?
beginning to, we're going to continue the questions and discussions. One second. I just want to, in a moment, I just want to say a couple of things. We are going to have an ongoing series of talks and discussions, Know Your History, Know Your Destiny, here at the library, to maximize our capacity to get in touch with people. I want to be sure people sign up on the library list. Where is that list so people can see that?
Sure.
I saw it go that way. There it is.
Okay,
Go all the way to the back.
great. Sign up so that we can be in touch and we can continue this endless discussion, because the discussion can only lead to steps that we can take to improve our lives. And that's the whole purpose of this. And I just wanted to say one short thing about Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was one of the first targets of J. Edgar Hoover. And he was deported and imprisoned because of exactly the work that Pierre was talking about. Because he was working to organize black people in the United States to develop a movement. His movement, to this day, remains the largest African-American organization in the United States, the United Negro Improvement Association. And he was targeted before the FBI was the FBI, when J. Edgar Hoover was in his 20s. And it was one of the ways J. Edgar made his name. And it was completely bogus. When you read about how they tossed him out of the country, it was just basically that he used in a flyer the wrong name for one of the ships they were going to use to bring people to Africa. That was the substance of the case, that he was defrauding the public, and the basis on which he was put in prison and deported. Anyway, I don't want to get into that too much. One thing I do want to say is that the news likes to talk about how America's longest war is Afghanistan. I think America's longest war is the war against the Indians. The Seminoles especially.
That's right.
But and second, I say the war against African American people, which is ongoing. And right here in the Hudson Valley, there's an ongoing struggle in that war. It's not coming to me.
Engine?
The Ramapo people in Ramapo Pass, right between New York and New Jersey, have been unbelievably oppressed. And they're also a group of people who are African and indigenous. And they're called, the racist term that's applied to them is they're Jackson Whites. No one's quite sure of where that name comes from, but it's basically a derogatory term of some kind to dismiss them. But they've had many of their people poisoned by dumping by the Ford Motor Company, and it's been a total cover-up job for years, literally a cover-up job, where they have not cleaned up the toxic waste site. They've only covered it with a little bit of soil. And that's an ongoing fight that we're going to learn more and more about, I think. But we're in touch with them. So there's one list for the library specifically, and we also have a list for NETOP KETOP, which is an organization of indigenous and non-indigenous people working to promote indigenous values. So if you're interested in that, we have a lot of programs as well. So please, Sally, could you wave that up for people to sign? The NETOP KETOP sign-up list.
And we'll
NETOP.
share all the lists.
Yeah, the lists will be shared with each other. So, people are beginning to leave. I wanted to get an announcement in before we had too many people leave. But there's more comments and questions. I think Lisa had it in.
Yeah, could you talk about language and communication on perhaps plantations throughout this entire time? I'm picking up that people from all different countries and all different tribes are being put together to work together. And how did they communicate? And did they all adopt English? What happened?
Yeah, that's what happened. They had to adopt. Okay. They had to adopt it in English. It was the only thing that they had in common. But Pierre can talk to you about Haiti, because they created their own language, the Creole. And then in some places, like in Cuba, for instance, there were enough people of one ethnicity that they could carry on the languages, and even right today in the ceremonies, in a certain ritual sense, the Yoruba and the Congo, the Bantu languages. You've heard the song, let's see, Kathy, is it Babalu? Okay, Babalu Aye is Yoruba. It means the king of the world, or the king of the earth. And so there are all these invocations to the deities, which are people study and learn to say them in the language. I have several vocabularies of the say hey bariba hey bariba hey ekama soy de cañoso suave así. That is from the Ñáñigo, Abacua. That's their invocation. So those languages are still spoken and used in a ritual sense, as they used to use Latin in the Catholic Mass. Those languages are still used right today because there were enough people of one ethnicity. They formed what is called a cabildo, and that was their a society, and they were able to maintain those languages. So the language question varies all over the lot. The U.S. was the outlier in that people were forced to take a pidgin English. But Pierre can talk to us about Creole.
Okay, about Creole.
I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know about the areas of focus in the future, but I would certainly be interested in knowing how what has happened in North Dakota has brought back together the various Native American groups. I don't know if that's going to be a focus at any point in time in the future.
That's a good suggestion.
Standing Rock.
Yeah, Standing Rock.
That's a great yeah. So, Odell, I hope you're taking note.
No, I'm listening to a lot what's been said so far.
Okay.
NETOP KETOP has co-sponsored events like that.
Let me make one point about what language did they speak. You know, various groups are speaking their own language, from their own culture. And one of the points, if you read that book, Eugene Genovese's book, From Rebellion to Revolution, there's a process they go through. That sooner or later, you get to what they call the generation where people are born here in the Americas. You see, so they're moving beyond that total ethnicity of one group. And they're beginning to speak English, learn English, you see. And it's this Creole group that eventually leads, shall we say, the revolution of the rebellions. You know, normally just flight. You know, people fleeing the plantations, creating maroonage, you know, in the swamps or in the mountains. But the object is, how do you get into this so-called bourgeoisie, democratic frame of things? You know, you have to, sort of say, cut across ethnic boundaries, eliminate those. This is the process that happens. So by the time you get to, 1791, at least in the United States, they're moving in that direction. people are speaking one language, which is English. If they're speaking French, they might be speaking French, but it is English that they're speaking. And move beyond that. That is the language that drives them. That is the language that they deal with, is English.
Pierre's gonna talk about Creole, French.
Yeah, to the question of language in Haiti, for instance, that's my experience. When I was in elementary school in Haiti, okay, where I grew up, we were prohibited to speak Creole, which is the only language people speak spontaneously. You don't have to go to school to learn how to speak Creole. You learn it from your parents, you learn it from the street, from your friends, you learn it, it's in the air, it's in the air. That's a language that was created by the slaves, because we had about more than 7 different tribal language. Professor Sunarine, help me if you can on this matter about all these slaves tribes, all the African tribes that was in Haiti. We have in that book, Avengers of the New World. I count about 40 different tribes that was in one plantation in Haiti. Yeah. And all these tribes, all these people came with their language. They never learned French. So in order for them to unite their forces and fight against the masters, they had to create a new language, but it came spontaneously. Start with young people. Young people create the language. In the beginning, it's called pidgin. Professor, you just spoke about the pidgin, and pidgin in English also was at one point pidgin language. Yeah. So was Creole. Pidgin evolved to become a normal language, but it was a language spoken in Haiti, was the language spoken by the African slave. Creole came out of, when the French came in, they started to integrate the slave. There were a lot of interaction between, despite slavery, there was a lot of interaction between slaves who were on the plantations, interacting with French, and slaves who were in the field, in the house, doing housework. There were also the children of these slaves who developed the language. The language evolved to become what we call today Creole. Creole has different level of Creole. It's a matter of class. Creole is a reflection of class. The elite in Haiti, who send their children to French school, they know French, but 75% of Haitians don't know French. I learned French because I was in Catholic school, and my parents, were from the middle class, and I did grow up to learn and speak French, but I was being punished to speak Creole, my own native language. You're not supposed to speak it in society. You have to speak French. It's not. Creole is not fashionable enough. To these days, even though there's been a big change, some scholars, they managed to bring French, bring Creole to the level of an academic language. And Creole has a dictionary now, the grammar, and the sentence structure is pretty sophisticated, but it's still Creole. And we noticed that a lot of people can't even still speak French in Haiti. I would say 25% of the population only can speak French in Haiti. Yeah.
Add a problem to that. Okay. I mentioned that I have a nephew who was born in Haiti, and his mother insisted that he speak only French. And so when he came to the U.S. He only spoke French, and he did not speak Creole. Because there are two colonies in New York City. There's the middle class French-speaking around Rego Park, and my nephew belongs to that group. And then there are the more Creole-speaking people in Brooklyn. Yeah, so you see that class distinction.
But what happened, okay, so, but you did have 100% of the people in Haiti knew Creole and were capable of speaking it, and then you just had the elite and some of the middle class that spoke French. But when President Aristide, this liberation priest that came into power in 1990 very briefly, and then there were a couple of coups against him, but a very progressive guy, he elevated Creole to the level of an official language. So technically, French, Haiti has two languages, French and Creole, and that was a big struggle. And I'm just going to do a little name dropping, but Pierre has a very, very famous cousin, Mauriceau Leroy, the writer and poet, who is called the father of Haitian Creole.
Oh, great.
Is there a public school system in Haiti?
Yeah,
What?
Is there a public school system in Haiti? Or is it all private? Or
Hello, excuse me.
One at a time, please. One at a time, please.
I just want to mention something before everybody starts leaving about what just happened, because I don't want you to forget what we're doing. Okay. First off, Paul told you this is, know your history, know your death. They started talking in the way that what the word Seminole means, like ugly, big, Have anybody heard those words before? Yeah. All right, if you belong to Engine, in the new Jim Crow Action Network, you heard those words with the person that killed Michael Brown. He was big, he was that. And so when people, especially white folks that sit on the grand jury, and white folks that sit in courts, when they hear about a black person, they use the language that ain't nothing changed in America. I mean, we can intellectualize this all we want right now, but what we're trying to do is teach you what's going on today. All right? And what's going on today is how what people think of people of color. All right? And when you look at who's going to jail, what schools is failing, all right? This is real history. So we want to connect it to real issues in the community. We can you can raise your hand and intellectualize it all you want, but it's still a problem in our community. When we talk about who is the victim, I mean, when young people are killed by the police got a whole system where he can go and say, well, I was threatened. I felt threatened. And he got backup when people look at that kid or look at that man and say, that's a Seminole. That's history. All right? That's the history we want you to understand we're talking about. We want to show you how it's connected today. So you can look at the prison system and mass incarceration. You can look at the school system, the school to prison pipeline. You can look at anything you want. You can look at families being decimated by the prison industrial complex. But when you look at it in the context of what you just heard. Just look at it like that. All right? Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I thought we were going to dedicate this night to him.
Think of this white woman that just got killed by the police. They arrested them cops right away.
We have to change, and we got to realize that scholars like this that brought this information is connected to today. We have to keep it connected. All right?